Amina's heart hammered in her chest as she was shoved through the heavy wooden doors. Her breath caught in her throat as the dark, cold air of the mansion swallowed her whole. The walls were lined with gold, but none of it could mask the oppressive silence that surrounded her. This wasn't a home. This was a prison. Her eyes darted to the man who stood waiting for her at the far end of the grand hall, his figure tall and imposing, like a shadow stretching across the room. His name was Lee Jae-hyun, the man who had bought her, the man she was now forced to marry to pay off her uncle's $3 million debt. Amina could hardly believe it. She had been living a simple life in Nigeria, dreaming of a future full of promise, and now, at 17, her world had been shattered. Her uncle's desperation had led to this, the very thing she had feared most. She had never wanted this life, never wanted to be a pawn in some rich man's game, but here she was, standing in front of a monster. "You look surprised." Jae-hyun's voice cut through the silence, deep and cold, sending a shiver down Amina's spine. Amina didn't respond. She couldn't. What was there to say? She had no words left. She had no fight left in her. They had taken everything, her freedom, her voice, her future. Now she was nothing but a bargaining chip in his ruthless empire. "Don't just stand there," he said, his tone sharp, commanding. "Sit." Amina slowly lowered herself onto the plush chair he indicated, her legs trembling beneath her. She couldn't meet his eyes, those cold, calculating eyes that pierced through her like a dagger. She had read about men like him, ruthless, powerful, capable of anything to get what they wanted. And now she was his possession, just another item to check off on his list of conquests. "You should be grateful," Jae-hyun continued, his voice low. "I've spared your uncle's life, after all. It's the least I could do." She clenched her fists, refusing to let the tears spill. "I never asked for this," she said, her voice barely a whisper. Jae-hyun stepped closer, his presence overwhelming. "You don't have to ask for anything," he said softly, almost too softly. "You don't get a choice here. You belong to me now. And, trust me, that's a far better fate than the alternative." Amina looked up at him, her eyes burning with defiance. "I'll never belong to you." He smiled, but it wasn't a warm smile. It was the smile of a man who had long since lost any trace of humanity. "We'll see about that," he said. The room fell silent, except for the soft ticking of a clock on the wall. Amina's chest tightened, and she fought the urge to flee, to run from this nightmare. But where would she go? This man owned everything. Her uncle had sold her, and now she was trapped in this gilded cage, with no way out. "You'll get used to this place," Jae-hyun said, breaking the silence once more. "Eventually. And when you do, maybe you'll start to see things my way." Amina swallowed hard, the words stinging in her throat. "I'll never see things your way." He regarded her silently for a moment, his expression unreadable. Then he turned and walked away, leaving her alone in the center of the cold, marble room. The weight of the silence pressed in on her as she fought to control her breathing. She wasn't sure how much longer she could stay strong. She had never felt so powerless in her life. Minutes passed, or was it hours? Amina lost track of time. Her thoughts raced. How had she ended up here? How could her uncle have done this to her? Why hadn't she fought harder? But it didn't matter now. There was no way out, no way to undo what had been done. She had no choice but to endure, to survive. Just as she was about to stand, the door swung open again, and Jae-hyun reappeared, this time with a set of clothes in his hands. He held them out to her without a word. Amina stared at the clothes in confusion. "What are these?" "Your new wardrobe," he replied, his voice matter-of-fact. "You'll wear these from now on. You'll dress the way I want you to." Amina recoiled. "I'm not your doll. I don't need your clothes." Jae-hyun's expression didn't change. "You will wear them, or I'll make sure you don't have anything to wear at all. Do I make myself clear?" Her heart sank as the truth of his words settled in. There was no room for defiance here. This was his world, and she was just a piece to be moved around at his whim. "Now, put them on," he commanded, stepping back to give her space. Amina stood there for a moment, the weight of her situation crashing down on her. There was no escape. No one would come for her. She was alone in this cold, heartless place, forced to play by Jaehyun's rules. She slowly walked to the bed, her steps heavy as she picked up the clothes. They were expensive, luxurious, and exactly what he wanted. A part of her wanted to tear them apart, to reject them entirely. But another part of her, her survival instinct, the part of her that refused to break, knew that she had to comply. For now. She changed in silence, the sound of her breath the only thing filling the space between them. When she was done, she stood before him, her head held high despite the tears that threatened to spill. Jaehyun glanced at her, his cold eyes scanning her form. "Better," he said, his voice devoid of any warmth. "Now, come with me." Amina hesitated for a moment, but then, realizing she had no choice, she followed him down the long, empty hallway. Every step felt heavier than the last, as though she was walking further away from everything she had ever known. Don't forget to hit like, subscribe, and leave a comment below. What do you think of her situation? Can she find a way out, or is she doomed to live under Jaehyun's control? Stay tuned for more twists in this story. Amina's footsteps echoed through the grand hall as she followed Jaehyun deeper into the mansion. Her mind raced with 1,000 questions, each more desperate than the last. Was there any way out of this nightmare? How had she become someone else's possession? The walls seemed to close in around her, the silence too thick to bear. Jaehyun didn't speak as they walked, his presence heavy and imposing, like a dark cloud that wouldn't lift. His men flanked the hallway, eyes constantly on her, making it impossible to forget that she was being watched at all times. It was suffocating. She glanced around, trying to make sense of the grandness that surrounded her. The marble floors, the gilded frames, the expensive art that adorned the walls, everything screamed power and wealth. But none of it meant anything to her. She didn't want any of it. What was the point of all this luxury if she was nothing more than a pawn in his game? They reached a large, ornate door at the end of the hallway, and Jaehyun pushed it open without a word. Inside was a massive office, sleek and modern, yet still carrying that sense of cold authority. Amina couldn't help but notice the floor-to-ceiling windows that gave a panoramic view of the city, the lights below twinkling like 1,000 distant stars. "Sit," Jaehyun commanded, gesturing to a chair in front of his massive desk. His voice held no warmth, no hint of kindness, just the iron grip of someone who expected obedience. Amina stood her ground, staring at him defiantly. "I won't sit until you tell me why I'm here," she said, her voice trembling but determined. Jaehyun's lips curled into a small smile, but it didn't reach his eyes. "You're here because you have no choice. And that's something you'll need to accept, Amina." She didn't back down. "I refuse to be treated like this. I don't care how powerful you think you are, this isn't right." His eyes narrowed slightly, his expression growing more intense. "You don't get to make the rules here, little girl. You're in my world now. I've made sure your uncle's debt is cleared, but that doesn't mean you get a free pass. You're mine." Amina's heart pounded. She wanted to scream at him, to run, to do anything that would free her from this nightmare. But her body was frozen, trapped in this gilded cage with no way out. She was alone. "You'll be expected to act like a wife, Amina," Jaehyun continued, his voice growing more sinister. "When I take you to events, you'll smile, you'll behave, and you'll keep your mouth shut. That's your role. Understand?" Amina's stomach twisted at the thought. "I'm not your wife," she spat. "I'm not anything to you." Jaehyun's gaze hardened, and for a moment, Amina feared he might strike her. But instead, he simply stepped closer, his towering figure overwhelming her. "You will be whatever I need you to be, whether you like it or not." He turned away, moving toward the large windows. "I know you hate me. But that's not my problem, Amina. My world isn't kind, but it's the only world I know. And if you want to survive in it, you'll have to learn to survive me." Amina watched him, her pulse racing. "You think I'll just fall in line?" she asked, her voice trembling with a mixture of fear and defiance. "Yes," he said simply, his back still turned to her. "In time, you'll learn that this world isn't as terrible as you think. You'll learn to enjoy the power, the privilege. And you'll learn to trust me." Amina's chest tightened. Trust him? After everything he had done? He had taken everything from her, her future, her freedom, and now he wanted her to trust him? It was absurd. You don't know anything about me, she said through gritted teeth. I don't belong here, Jaehyun. I'm not a part of your world. Jaehyun finally turned around, a sharp, almost imperceptible smile playing at the corners of his lips. You're right. You don't belong here. But you will. I'll make sure of it. His eyes never left hers, and in that moment, Amina felt something shift in the air, something dark, unsettling. The way he looked at her was no longer just cruel, it was possessive, as if he were already planning how to break her, how to mold her into exactly what he wanted. The thought made her sick to her stomach. But as the minutes passed in silence, Amina began to feel the pressure of his gaze, his power, seeping into her bones. What was she supposed to do? She was trapped in a world she didn't understand, with a man who had no conscience. She had no escape, no way out. Just then, a knock at the door broke her thoughts. Jaehyun turned to address his men, dismissing them with a simple wave of his hand. But before they left, he said something that made Amina's blood run cold. Keep an eye on her, he ordered. She needs to learn her place. As the men filed out, Jaehyun turned back to Amina, his expression unreadable. This is your life now. You're no longer free to make your own decisions. Everything you do, every step you take, will be under my control. You're mine, Amina. Remember that. Her stomach churned, but she refused to let him see her fear. I'll never be yours, she said, the words coming out with more conviction than she felt. Jaehyun chuckled, a low, dangerous sound. We'll see about that. The door closed behind him with a quiet finality, and Amina was left alone, staring at the empty room around her. She didn't know what to do, didn't know where to turn. All she knew was that she had to survive. Somehow. As the hours dragged on, she thought of the life she had left behind, the streets of Nigeria, the freedom she had once taken for granted. Her family was gone. Her dreams were shattered. And now she was trapped in this gilded cage, forced to play the role of a wife to a man who owned her every breath. But as she sat there, staring at the city below, a spark of determination flared in her chest. She wouldn't let him break her. No matter what he did, no matter how powerful he was, she would fight. She had to. Amina barely slept that night. Her thoughts were a constant whirlwind of fear, anger, and confusion. She lay in the cold, vast bed that was now hers, but it felt like a foreign place, an alien world she wasn't meant to be part of. The sheets were made of silk, soft against her skin, but they felt suffocating, like a reminder of everything she had lost. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw Jaehyun's face, his cold, unfeeling eyes, the way he had looked at her like an object, like she didn't matter. He was right, though. In his world, she didn't matter. She was just another piece in a game of power, another transaction to pay off her uncle's debts. The thought made her stomach twist in anger. She had to find a way out. But how? There was no escape from this mansion, no way to outrun the cold grip of the man who controlled everything. She had no idea how to fight this kind of war. At dawn, a soft knock interrupted her thoughts. She sat up, heart racing, wiping away the remnants of tears she hadn't realized she'd shed. Come in, she called out, her voice rough from lack of sleep. The door opened slowly, revealing a maid with a polite bow. Miss Amina, it's time for your breakfast. Mr. Lee would like to see you after. Amina's eyes narrowed, but she nodded. Fine. Tell him I'll be there. The maid hesitated, her eyes flicking nervously before she spoke again. He insists you wear the dress he sent for you. It's important. Amina's chest tightened. She didn't want to wear anything Jaehyun had chosen for her. She wanted to burn it all. But she knew there was no room for defiance, not in his world. She forced a tight smile, though it didn't reach her eyes. I'll wear it. The maid nodded and left, leaving Amina alone with her thoughts once more. The weight of it all pressed down on her. She had no control. Nothing was hers anymore. But she wasn't ready to give up. Not yet. She stood from the bed and made her way to the small, ornate closet. The dress Jaehyun had sent her was a deep red, cut low at the chest and hugging her body in ways that made her skin crawl. She slipped it on reluctantly, the fabric foreign against her skin. As she stared at her reflection, a part of her wanted to tear the dress apart, to reject everything it represented. But she stopped herself. She couldn't be weak. Not now. The moment she entered the dining room, Jaehyun's eyes locked onto her, as if he had been waiting for her. His expression was unreadable, but there was something in his gaze, something that made her feel both trapped and strangely powerful. He said nothing at first, his eyes scanning her up and down. She stood tall, not allowing him to see the fear in her eyes. "You look beautiful," he said finally, his voice smooth like velvet, but cold, like everything else about him. Amina didn't flinch. "I'm not here to look beautiful for you," she replied, her tone sharp, though her voice shook slightly. Jaehyun chuckled, a low, dangerous sound. "You don't have to do anything for me, Amina. You already belong to me. All of you." Her pulse quickened at the finality in his words. The statement wasn't just a declaration, it was a reminder that she had no say, no choice in this. He had claimed her, and there was nothing she could do to change that. He motioned for her to sit across from him, his eyes never leaving her face. The table between them was lavish, with food she couldn't even name. But all of it seemed pointless, meaningless, as if she were simply going through the motions. The silence between them stretched, thick with tension. Amina fought to keep her composure. She refused to be intimidated by him. But it was hard when everything around her screamed of his power. The way he sat, perfectly at ease, as though the entire world was at his feet, only reminded her of her helplessness. "You're not going to fight me forever, Amina," he said, his voice breaking the silence. "You'll get used to this world. You'll learn to enjoy it." Her heart thudded painfully in her chest. "I'll never enjoy it," she snapped, her anger flaring. "I'll never be part of your world. I didn't ask for this." Jaehyun leaned back in his chair, his fingers tapping rhythmically on the table. "You don't have to ask for anything, Amina. You don't have that privilege anymore." Amina clenched her fists, her nails digging into her palms. "I won't be your toy. I won't play along with this twisted game." Jaehyun's lips curled into a small smile, but there was no warmth in it. "I'm not asking you to play along. I'm telling you how things will be. You'll be mine, Amina. And when you finally realize that, maybe you'll start to see things my way." She glared at him, but his gaze never wavered. "I'll never see things your way. I don't care how powerful you are or how many people you've broken to get here. You're still just a man." Jaehyun's smile faded, replaced by something darker, more intense. "Don't mistake my patience for weakness," he warned, his voice low and steady. "You'll learn. Eventually, you'll understand why this world works the way it does." Amina's heart pounded in her chest as she stared at him. The anger was still there, but now there was something else to fear, yes, but something deeper. Something she wasn't ready to face yet. "Don't think you can control me, Jaehyun," she said, her voice trembling slightly despite her best effort to hold it together. He stood up slowly, his eyes locking onto hers with an intensity that made her breath catch. "I don't need to control you, Amina. You'll come to me willingly in time. Trust me, I'll make sure of it." If you're getting hooked on Amina's defiance, make sure to like, subscribe, and leave a comment below. Do you think she'll ever give in to Jaehyun's control, or will she fight back until the end? Stick around for more. Days passed, and Amina's world became a strange routine, one that made her feel more and more like a prisoner in a golden cage. The mansion was vast, its hallways endless, but every step she took felt as if it was leading her deeper into a world she could never escape. She was constantly watched, surrounded by Jaehyun's men, his presence looming over her every move. Every night, she lay in her bed, staring at the ceiling, wondering how she had gotten here, what had gone wrong. She tried to hold on to the memory of her life in Nigeria, the vibrant streets, the warm sun on her skin. But it was becoming harder to remember, like a dream slipping away from her fingers. In this cold mansion, there was no room for dreams. Only survival. But despite the weight of her situation, there was a part of Amina that refused to give in. The defiance that had burned in her from the moment she was brought here was still alive, flickering in the dark corners of her heart. She would never be his. Never. One evening, as she wandered through the vast halls of the mansion, she found herself in the garden, a small, quiet refuge from the oppressive walls of the house. The moonlight cast an ethereal glow on the flowers, their petals soft and delicate, like a distant memory of the life she once had. She knelt beside them, her fingers brushing the cool earth, grounding herself in the familiar comfort of nature. A soft rustling behind her made her freeze. Slowly she turned, her breath catching in her throat as she saw him, Jaehyun, standing at the edge of the garden, his figure outlined by the dim light. His gaze was steady, his expression unreadable. "You're out here again," he said, his voice calm, almost too calm. Amina stood up quickly, brushing dirt off her hands. "I just needed a moment to breathe," she said, her tone defensive. Jaehyun stepped closer, his eyes never leaving hers. "I didn't give you permission to leave the house." Amina stiffened. "I don't need your permission to breathe." He raised an eyebrow, as if he found her defiance amusing. "You think you can do whatever you want, don't you? But you forget, Amina, you're in my world now. Your world doesn't exist anymore." Her pulse quickened, her hands clenching into fists at her sides. "I will never accept this," she said, her voice trembling but full of resolve. "You can't own me, Jaehyun. You'll never control me." His lips curled into a slow smile, a smile that sent a chill through her veins. "You'll come to understand that control isn't a choice, Amina. It's a necessity." Amina's eyes burned with fury, but she refused to show any weakness. She wouldn't give him the satisfaction. "I don't care about your world, and I don't care about your rules." He stepped closer, his presence overwhelming her. "You will," he said softly, his voice like a whisper, yet carrying the weight of a promise. "In time, you'll understand why this is the only way. And you'll learn that fighting it is futile." The air between them crackled with tension. Amina could feel the heat of his body, the pull of his power, but she fought against it. She wasn't going to let him break her. Not now, not ever. Before she could respond, he reached out, grabbing her wrist in a grip that was just firm enough to send a shiver through her. "Come with me," he ordered. Amina tried to pull away, but his grip was unyielding. "Let me go," she snapped. He ignored her, his expression cold. "You don't get to refuse me, Amina." The anger flared inside her, but she swallowed it down, forcing herself to stay calm. This wasn't the time to fight. Not yet. If she fought him now, it would only make things worse. Jaehyun led her back into the mansion, his grip still firm on her wrist. She didn't speak as they walked, her mind racing. She had to find a way out. She couldn't stay here, trapped in this gilded cage with no way to escape. They entered his office and Jaehyun closed the door behind them. He let go of her wrist and Amina immediately stepped back, putting distance between them. The tension in the room was thick, heavy, and she could feel it pressing down on her. Jaehyun stood by his desk, his hands resting on the surface. He didn't look at her as he spoke. "You think you can fight me, don't you? You think you can somehow escape this?" Amina swallowed hard, the words caught in her throat. "I won't be your puppet," she said, her voice low but steady. "You can't control me." Jaehyun's gaze finally met hers, and for the first time, there was something in his eyes. Something almost human, almost vulnerable. But it was fleeting, gone as quickly as it had appeared. "You think you're the first to try and defy me?" he asked, his voice dark, almost amused. "You think you're special?" Amina met his gaze, unflinching. "I don't need to be special," she said. "I just need to survive." For a long moment, they stood in silence, the weight of their words hanging in the air. Amina's heart pounded in her chest, her breath coming faster. She could feel the walls closing in around her again, suffocating her, but she wouldn't let herself break. She couldn't. Finally, Jaehyun spoke again, his voice soft, almost too soft. "You'll learn to trust me, Amina. You'll see that I'm not the monster you think I am." Amina's eyes widened in disbelief. "Trust you," she echoed, the word bitter on her tongue. "You think I'll ever trust you?" Jaehyun's smile returned, but this time it was cold, knowing. In time, you will. You'll have no choice. Amina felt a wave of frustration and fear wash over her. She couldn't stay in this world. She couldn't stay with him. But how could she escape when everything she did only brought her closer to him? Amina didn't sleep that night. She lay in the cold bed, her eyes staring into the darkness, her mind a battlefield of conflicting thoughts. The memory of Jaehyun's touch still lingered on her wrist where he had gripped her. The feel of his hand on her skin had sent a shiver down her spine, but it wasn't just fear. It was something darker, something she couldn't name. Every moment spent near him seemed to twist her emotions in ways she didn't understand. She thought of her life back in Nigeria, her family, the streets she used to walk down, the sunlight on her skin. She had been a girl with dreams, aspirations. Now, she was nothing more than a prisoner in a gilded cage, her every move watched, her every breath controlled by a man who saw her as nothing but a commodity. But the anger inside her burned brighter than ever. She wouldn't give in. No matter what he tried, no matter how much he controlled her, she would fight him. She had to. The next morning, Amina was summoned to Jaehyun's office again. She had barely set foot in the mansion's grand foyer when one of his men appeared out of nowhere, escorting her to the same office where their previous conversation had ended in silence. This time, there was no pleasant facade to his presence. Jaehyun was waiting for her, his expression as cold and calculating as always. He was standing by the large window, staring out at the city below, his broad shoulders tense, his posture rigid. When he turned to face her, there was a new intensity in his eyes, something deeper and more dangerous than the usual icy detachment. "You didn't listen to me last night," he said, his voice smooth but laced with something darker. "You think you can defy me, Amina. But you can't." Amina didn't flinch. "I can try," she said, her voice sharp. "And I will." Jaehyun studied her for a moment, his gaze unwavering. "You think your resistance is strong," he said, a faint smile tugging at his lips. "But you're wrong. Resistance in my world is futile. You'll learn that soon enough." Amina crossed her arms, refusing to back down. "I won't give in to you. You don't own me." He laughed, low and dark, a sound that sent a shiver down her spine. "I don't need to own you, Amina. You'll come to me willingly. You'll beg me to let you stay, to let you belong. And when that day comes, you'll realize you were always mine." Her blood ran cold at his words. "I'll never beg you for anything," she snapped, her eyes blazing with fury. "I won't be part of your world. I'll find a way out, no matter what." Jaehyun's eyes flickered with something. Was it amusement or irritation? A flicker of something deeper, but she couldn't tell what. He took a step forward, closing the space between them, his presence overwhelming. "You think you have control, but you don't," he said, his voice dropping to a whisper. "You never will." Amina felt the air between them crackle with tension. Her heart pounded in her chest as he reached out, his hand brushing against her cheek, a touch so gentle that it confused her even more. She jerked her head back, instinctively pulling away, but he didn't press the issue. He just watched her, his eyes dark and unreadable. "You don't know me, Amina," he said quietly. "You don't know what I've done. What I've sacrificed. Everything I've built, everything I've fought for. I did it all so I wouldn't have to answer to anyone. So I wouldn't have to care about anyone. But now..." He trailed off, his gaze flickering to the ground before returning to her face. "Now I have to care about you." Amina's breath caught in her throat. "You don't care about me," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "You only care about control. You think you can break me, but you're wrong." Jaehyun's eyes narrowed, and for a moment, Amina saw something like regret flash in his gaze. It was gone as quickly as it had come, replaced once again by the cold, impenetrable walls he had built around himself. "You're right about one thing," he said, his voice steady once more. "I don't care about you, at least, not in the way you want me to. But that doesn't mean I won't make you care about me." Amina's heart raced. "I'll never care about you," she said, the words feeling like a declaration of war. Jaehyun's smile returned, but this time it was something darker, more dangerous. "We'll see." Before she could say anything more, he turned away, walking toward the door. "You'll be accompanying me to a gala tonight. You'll wear the dress I've chosen for you, and you'll smile. Do you understand?" Amina stood there, her fists clenched at her sides. She wasn't going to play his game. She wasn't going to wear his dress or smile at his command. But what choice did she have? "I understand," she said through gritted teeth, her voice low and defiant. Jaehyun stopped just before opening the door. He turned to look at her one last time, his gaze piercing. "Good. I expect you to behave. This is your life now, Amina. You'll either learn to live it my way, or you'll be forced to live it alone." And with that, he was gone, leaving her standing alone in the silence of the room. Amina's fists trembled at her sides as she fought to keep her composure. She hated him. She hated everything about this world he had trapped her in, but she would survive. She had to, no matter what it took. The gala that night was unlike anything Amina had ever seen. The lights, the opulence, the luxury, it was as if she had stepped into a different world. Jaehyun's world. A world of wealth and power, where every gesture, every word, was calculated, every move a play for dominance. But to Amina, it felt like a stage, and she was the unwilling actress, trapped in a role she didn't want to play. She had been forced into a dress that clung to her body, a deep blue satin number that made her feel exposed. Her skin felt too tight beneath the fabric, like she was wearing someone else's skin. The moment she stepped out of the car and into the grand ballroom, the eyes of every guest turned toward her. Amina felt her pulse quicken, the weight of their stares pressing down on her like a suffocating blanket. She tried to keep her head high, to project confidence, but it was impossible. Everything about this world, this life, made her feel small, insignificant. She was nothing here, nothing but an ornament on Jaehyun's arm, a display of his wealth, his power. As they entered the ballroom, Jaehyun's grip on her arm was firm, possessive. He didn't speak, but she could feel the tension in his body. It was as if he was preparing for battle, every step calculated, every glance a message. He was used to this, used to the game of dominance and submission. But Amina wasn't going to play by his rules. "Smile," Jaehyun murmured low enough for only her to hear. "You don't want to give them any reason to talk." Amina forced a smile, the motion feeling unnatural, like a mask she had to wear to survive. She wasn't here to please anyone. She wasn't here to entertain. But that was the role she had been cast in, whether she liked it or not. The room was full of high-profile business people, government officials, and socialites. Men in tailored suits and women in sparkling gowns, their laughter and chatter blending with the soft hum of the orchestra. But despite the elegance, Amina couldn't shake the feeling that it was all a facade. Beneath the surface of champagne and smiles, there was something dark, something dangerous. Jaehyun led her through the crowd, his presence commanding attention. Every step they took, the whispers followed them like a shadow. People glanced at her, then at Jaehyun, their gazes lingering with interest. She hated the way they looked at her, like she was something to be owned, something to be possessed. "This is my world," Jaehyun said, his voice low as if sensing her discomfort. "And you'll get used to it, Amina. You'll learn to move in it like everyone else." Amina didn't respond. She wasn't sure what to say. She had no intention of becoming like them. She didn't want this world. She wanted out. But there was no way out. Not yet. They stopped at a table where a group of influential men stood. Amina barely registered their faces. She didn't care about their names or their titles. What she cared about was the way Jaehyun introduced her, as if she were nothing more than a trophy to be displayed. "This is Amina," Jaehyun said smoothly, his arm around her waist, pulling her closer. "My wife." The word stung like a slap. Wife. She had never agreed to this. She had never chosen this life, and yet here she was, standing before people who thought they knew her, people who saw her as nothing but a pawn in Jaehyun's game. She forced herself to smile again, but the movement felt empty, hollow. Her eyes met Jaehyun's, and for a fleeting moment, she saw something in them, something she couldn't quite place. It was as if he was waiting for her to crack, waiting for her to show weakness. But Amina wouldn't give him that satisfaction. She wouldn't break. Not yet. As the night wore on, the conversations around her grew louder, more animated. She was introduced to people she didn't care about, smiled at faces that didn't matter. But through it all, Jaehyun never left her side, his presence like a constant weight on her shoulders. He was always watching, always observing. She felt like a mouse trapped in a cage, and he was the predator waiting for the right moment to strike. At one point, Jaehyun excused himself to speak with a business associate, and Amina found herself alone in the corner of the ballroom, watching the crowd around her. She wanted to escape, to run far away from this suffocating world, but she knew it was impossible. The heavy perfume of the air, the laughter of strangers, the soft clink of glasses, it all felt like a dream, like she wasn't really here. She wanted to scream, to tell someone the truth. But who would believe her? Who would care? Suddenly, she felt a tap on her shoulder. She turned, expecting to see one of Jaehyun's men, but instead, she was met with the piercing gaze of a woman she hadn't seen before. She was tall, blonde, and elegant, with a knowing smile that made Amina feel instantly uneasy. "You must be Amina," the woman said, her voice dripping with honey. "Jaehyun has told me so much about you." Amina stiffened. "I'm not sure I know you," she said, her voice colder than she had intended. The woman's smile didn't falter. "Oh, I'm just a friend," she said smoothly. "But I think you'll fit in perfectly here. Jaehyun has a way of choosing exactly the right kind of woman." Amina's heart skipped a beat. The woman's words felt like a warning, like a veiled threat. "I don't belong here," Amina said, her voice steady, though her insides twisted with unease. "And I'm not going to play by your rules." The woman's smile widened, but there was no kindness in it. "We'll see about that," she said, her tone almost sweet. "You might not have a choice in the matter." Before Amina could respond, the woman turned and melted back into the crowd, leaving her standing there, more uncertain than ever. Will she finally break free from Jaehyun's world, or will she be forced to surrender? Don't forget to like, subscribe, and leave a comment below. The days blurred together in the mansion. Amina's life had become a series of carefully curated appearances, like a puppet being pulled by invisible strings. She no longer saw herself as a person, but as an object in Jaehyun's world, there to be controlled, to be shown off. The gala had been a constant reminder of that. She was a decoration, nothing more. But she refused to surrender. Jaehyun's presence loomed over every aspect of her life. Even when he wasn't physically close, she could feel his eyes on her, his power smothering her like a blanket. Yet, there was something in her that refused to break. No matter how often he reminded her of her place, no matter how many times he made her feel small, she held on to the defiance that had been with her since the moment she was sold into this life. But the cracks in Jaehyun's facade began to show too. At night, when the mansion was silent and the world outside seemed to fade away, Amina noticed the fleeting moments of vulnerability in him. He would stand by the window, staring out into the distance, lost in thought. He wasn't the monster she had initially believed him to be. No, Jaehyun was a man broken by his past, haunted by decisions he had made long before she ever came into his life. One night, as Amina wandered the mansion, her heart racing with the need for escape, she found herself in the grand library. The shelves were lined with books she would never read, and the silence in the room felt suffocating. But it was in this silence that she heard him, a soft click of the door behind her. She turned to find Jaehyun standing there, his gaze intense as it locked onto hers. "Why do you run from me?" he asked, his voice low, almost accusing. Amina felt a flare of anger rise in her chest. "I'm not running from you," she snapped, her tone sharper than she intended. "I'm trying to find something, anything, that makes me feel like I'm still alive. I've been stripped of everything I am, everything I was." Jaehyun's expression didn't change, but his eyes softened just slightly. "I didn't want this for you, Amina. But it doesn't matter what either of us wants anymore. You're mine. You always have been." The words stung, but Amina refused to let him see her pain. "I'm not yours, Jaehyun. You can take my freedom, you can take my choices, but you'll never own my heart. You'll never own me." He moved closer, his footsteps echoing in the vast room. You think you can fight me forever? His voice was a whisper now, dangerous, as though he were testing her resolve. Amina stood tall, her gaze unwavering. I will fight you every day for as long as I breathe. I don't care how powerful you are, how many men you control, how many lives you've destroyed. I won't be one of them. I won't be your possession. There was a long silence, a tension hanging between them like a storm ready to break. Jaehyun didn't speak for a long time, just watching her, as though weighing her words, measuring her strength. Finally, he broke the silence with a soft, almost regretful sigh. You're more than I thought, he murmured, almost to himself. You're stronger than I ever expected. Amina's chest tightened at the sincerity in his voice, but she refused to be fooled. Don't try to turn this into something else, she said, her voice harsh. You may have power, but you don't have my respect. You'll never have my trust. Jaehyun's eyes flickered with something. Was it sadness? Regret? He seemed to hesitate for a moment before the mask returned. You'll see, Amina, he said, his voice calm again, as if the vulnerability had never been there. In time, you'll learn that this is the only way. You'll come to understand that I did this for you, for both of us. No, she said, her voice steady, unyielding. You did this for you, not for me. And I will never accept it. The room was heavy with tension as they stood in silence, the weight of their unspoken thoughts hanging between them. Finally, Jaehyun turned, his back to her, heading toward the door. If you want to fight me, he said, his voice tinged with something she couldn't quite place, then fight. But know this, you will never win. You will never leave. Amina's breath caught in her throat, but she held her ground. I'll find a way. He stopped at the door, his hand resting on the knob. He didn't turn around, but she could feel his presence, his control, pressing down on her. Keep telling yourself that, he said, his voice low, almost a whisper. But remember, Amina, I never lose. Not when it matters. With that, he left, the door closing softly behind him. Amina stood there, her chest tight with emotion, her heart pounding in her chest. Was he right? Could she ever escape him? Could she really fight him, or was she doomed to live in this world forever? She clenched her fists, her nails digging into her palms. No, she wouldn't give in. She wouldn't let him break her. She had to survive, had to find a way to escape this prison of gold and power. But as she stared out the window, the city lights twinkle in the distance, a part of her knew something. Jaehyun was wrong. She wasn't trapped. Not yet. And she would keep fighting for her freedom, for her life, no matter what it took. Amina sat alone in her room, the moonlight streaming through the window, casting soft shadows across the floor. The silence in the mansion was deafening, but it was the silence of her own thoughts that weighed heavily on her. Every moment felt like a battle. Between the woman she once was and the one she was forced to become. Every time she looked into Jaehyun's eyes, she saw the walls he had built around himself, the walls he had expected her to fit into. But Amina wouldn't let herself be confined. She had spent weeks feeling trapped, controlled, suffocated by the life he had forced her into. Every time she thought of her family, of the life she had been robbed of, her chest tightened with anger. But now, that anger had turned into something else. It had turned into a fire, one that would fuel her determination to escape. Jaehyun was powerful, yes. He controlled everything, this mansion, the city, the people around him. But there was one thing he couldn't control. Her will. She had spent enough time in his world to understand it, to see the cracks beneath his stoic exterior. He wasn't invincible. He wasn't a god. He was a man. And that was the key. She could use that against him. Her heart raced as she made a decision. It was time to leave. It was time to take control of her own destiny, to stop letting Jaehyun decide her fate. The next morning, as dawn broke and the mansion began to stir, Amina slipped out of bed, moving quietly so no one would hear. She had memorized the layout of the mansion, learned its secrets. She knew the back entrance, the guards' routines, the moments when she would be unseen. The mansion felt cold, empty, as she crept down the hall. The familiar walls that had once felt like a prison now seemed like the walls of her freedom. Each step she took, she felt lighter. The weight of Jaehyun's control was lifting, and for the first time in weeks, Amina felt a sense of power. She reached the back door. It was locked, but she had found the key a few nights ago when she'd snuck into the study, searching for answers. She slid the key into the lock and turned it quietly. The door creaked open, and a rush of fresh air greeted her. For a moment, she stood still, taking in the scent of the outside world, the world she had almost forgotten. But there was no time to waste. The sound of footsteps echoed from the hallway, and Amina knew she had to move quickly. She stepped outside, her breath catching in her throat. The night was dark, but the stars above were a constant reminder that there was always hope, even in the darkest of places. She didn't know where she was going, but she didn't care. All that mattered was that she was free. Free from Jaehyun's world. Free from the chains he had placed around her. Several hours later, as the sun began to rise, Amina found herself on a quiet street in the city. Her heart was pounding, but she didn't stop. She didn't look back. She had made it. She had escaped. But she wasn't naive. She knew Jaehyun would come for her. He would hunt her down, and he would stop at nothing to bring her back. But for now, in this moment, she was free. And that was enough. Amina walked, her pace quickening with each step. She had no plan, no safety net, but she had something far more important than any of that. She had her life, her freedom, and she would fight for it no matter what it took. Back at the mansion, Jaehyun stood in his office, staring out the window as the city came to life below him. His mind raced with thoughts of Amina. She was strong, stronger than he had expected. And though he had always been in control, there was a part of him that admired her for it. But his admiration didn't change anything. She was his, and he would get her back. No matter what it took. He knew where she would go. He knew how she would think. But as he prepared to leave the mansion and track her down, something inside him stopped him. A part of him, the part that had been buried for so long, wondered if maybe, just maybe, she was right. Maybe he had been wrong. Maybe he had spent so much time trying to control the world around him, he had forgotten what it meant to truly be free. But before he could process the thought, he turned and walked out of the office, determination in his eyes. The game was far from over. Meanwhile, Amina kept walking, the sound of her footsteps echoing in the streets. She didn't know what the future held, and she didn't care. The road ahead would be difficult, dangerous even. But she was ready. She had survived the darkest part of her life, and now she was ready to fight for the life she deserved. She would never be his. She would never belong to anyone but herself. The city stretched out before her, full of endless possibilities. And for the first time in what felt like forever, Amina felt hope bloom in her chest. Her journey had just begun. But one thing was certain, she would never stop fighting. She would never be anyone's prisoner again.